Thank you so much for joining us on this wonderful celebration of the publication of Fit for Freedom, Not for Friendship, Quakers, African Americans, and the Myth of Racial Justice. We're also blessed to have Charlotte Blake Alston, storyteller, to give us some context for the presentation by the authors.
The words of Ralph Ellison's prologue to Invisible Man, the novel he published in 1952, came flooding into my head. I am an invisible man. No, I'm not a spook like those who haunted Edgar Allan Poe. I am a man of flesh and bone, fiber and substance, and I might even be said to possess a mind. I am invisible, understand, simply because people refuse to see me. I rushed into the Curtis Institute of Music just as the first piece began. A friend had invited me to his senior recital. The usher, a young man that I took to be a student, had just closed the door to the recital hall, and latecomers had to wait to be seated. As others arrived, the young man would hand each one a program and then turn his body towards the door, giving us his back. Another person arrived. He turned around again and handed her a program. Standing directly in front of him with no more than 10 inches of space between the two of us, I extended my hand upward, indicating that I did not have a program. He turned and faced the door. 3 more people came in. He turned and held the remaining programs up in the air and began to wave his arms and his head about, looking for those with empty hands, and handed programs to people way in the back of the foyer. I raised my hand higher and closer to his face, and he began handing programs over my head to people standing behind me. As I spread my fingers and extended my hand about 2 inches from his eyes, he held his arm up and handed the last program he had in his head over my head. Then he turned and gave us, me, his back. My chuckle was audible. I had been in this place before. I don't mean Curtis. I had been at Curtis Institute before, but I mean this place of racial invisibility. One of the patrons, all of whom were white, who saw the theatrics of this young man, offered me his program. I took the program, I thanked him, I opened it up, I perused it to see where my friend was placed on the recital. I closed it and handed it back to him. So there I was in my head, as Ralph Ellison's character was, racing through the ethnic slights and indignities file in my head, trying to get some guidance about how to respond. And without exception, every option I could think of involved connection. I don't mean eye-to-eye connection or contact. I don't mean let's sit down here and discuss what just happened. I wondered, if an invisible person steps on your heels, can you still feel it? Does a pinch by an invisible person leave a mark? Or I thought, well, maybe I'll wait till after the recital and the reception, and then I would accidentally but regrettably spill some punch in his crotch. Does punch spilled by an invisible person still feel cold and wet, sticky? In the end, there was a break in the recital, the door opened. I stood for a moment, exhaled, and walked into the recital hall to support my friend. there was a brave warrior named Strong Wind. He was born with special gifts and abilities. He was a wisdom seeker, a healer, courageous warrior. He had gifts that no one else had. He could see things that were going to happen before they actually happened. This made some uncomfortable when he was a boy. And often, when they were in his presence, they bumped against him. And over time, the bumps and the bruises wore away at his outer being. And gradually, he became invisible. But as he grew into manhood, his strengths grew even stronger. He could walk among his enemies, and they would not know he was there. He could listen to their conversations, and they did not know who he had heard. He could defeat them in battle, and they could not figure out how. Well, as time passed, and his gifts grew stronger and his reputation began to spread, many women thought of what their lives and the lives of their families and their villages might be like if they brought him into their compounds and married him. So often, women would go down to the lake, to the tent where he lived with his sister, and would call his sister out. "We have come to make Strong Wind our husband," they would say. She would tell them, "Come with me." And they would walk down the edges of the lake until just at sunset. She would turn and say, "There, my brother is coming. Can you see him?" Well, they knew that he was there. They could feel his presence. In the darkening sky, there was a moment of brightness, and a strong wind would catch their hair. But they could not see him. But they would say, "Yes." Some would say, "I think I do see him." Strong Wind's sister would say, "Tell me, what is it he uses to pull his sled along the ground?" And again, they would look and they saw nothing, but they would persist. Some would say, "A strong piece of wood." Others would say, "A long, thick piece of rawhide." And Strong Wind's sister, in spite of what they said, sent them all away without her brother as their husband. It was the spring of 1980 when I first walked through the door of a friend's school where I would spend the final years of my teaching experience. I had 9 years of teaching experience behind me, and at the time I was the educational director, a fancy word for head teacher, at the University of Pennsylvania Children's Center. And there, the mother of one of my students, a teacher at the friend's school, encouraged me to apply for an opening in the lower school. She had actually encouraged me the year before, but I kind of hesitated. And this time she said, "Well, if you're the least bit interested, just go and take the interview." A Quaker school. While stories of the religious society of Friends did not occupy a prominent place in the history books in schools in the 1950s and 60s, the focus of even the slightest mention of this community was almost always linked to the abolitionist movement. This was a community, I was taught, I was led to believe, with a history of human activism, of acknowledging the humanity of my American ancestors. This could be a place where I might be seen as I saw myself, a person, a teacher, not a black teacher, an environment where I might be accepted without fixed preconceived assumptions about my intellectual capacity, my ability to bring a standard of excellence into this educational environment. In addition, I was at a place in my own development as an educator where I had begun to rethink and reshape my philosophy of education and my approach to teaching, a major departure from the teacher training I received in college. I had begun to see children not as empty vessels whose head you lift up and you pour little bits and pieces of information inside, but as fully human entities who could be participants, active participants in the learning process. The school's philosophy seemed consonant with my own. I entered the grand foyer and greeted the school receptionist. Mrs. Anderson, a light-complexioned African-American woman in her 60s or so. I exhaled in a sigh of relief. As I walked down the long corridor towards the lower school, I began to look about, and as many of us do, to see if there was anybody else who looked like me. There was. She wore a blue uniform and was pushing a cleaning cart. "Good morning," I said. "Good morning." Her response was warm and welcoming and inviting and friendly. The interview process took place over a period of 2 days. As I moved from one department to the other, I considered not only my own comfort in this environment, but the comfort level of my son, who, if I accepted the position, would enter 2nd grade. As my 2nd day of interviews came to a close, I headed towards the door, and then I thought for a moment. I decided to turn around, go back, and see if I could find that same cleaning woman. And I would make my decision based upon what she had to say about what it was like for her to work in that environment. She answered my question enthusiastically. "I love it. The people here are just so nice." So when the offer came, I accepted it. I settled easily into the normal rhythm and flow of school, my first meeting for worship with 5 to 10-year-olds. Getting used to being addressed with the title teacher and my first name. Surviving my first parent night where I learned that every single child in my classroom except one was a genius. And they all needed to be challenged in extraordinary ways. Then came the faculty trustee dinner, an annual event to which faculty attendance was mandatory. Faculty members and members of the school's board of trustees were assigned to tables where they would share an evening of food and awkward, if not forced, conversation. This was a formal sit-down affair in the school dining hall with the dinner served on official school china. I didn't know schools had official china. I scanned the room as dinner was brought to us, and it hit me. All the people who were sitting down being served, except 3, were white. All of the people in uniform doing the serving, except 2 work-study students, were black. I was immediately physically uncomfortable. There was something wrong with this picture. There was something out of sorts about this statement. This was a community, I thought, under the auspices of the Religious Society of Friends, a community dedicated to human equity, a community striving to create within the walls of its institution a microcosm of the ideal society, a model of what America could become. So here in this microcosm of the ideal society, my place, as it was articulated in that environment, was done with crystal clarity. Most of the people of color attending that event were there to serve. This was a statement that I could not, would not participate in making. I approached the head of the cafeteria and asked how the dinner was organized. The headmaster, she said, he determines the format. He tells me what he wants and how he wants it and what food he wants, and I put everything together. So the following morning, I arranged to speak with the headmaster, and I expressed my concerns. Is there a reason why the format has to be a formal sit-down dinner? His response was that changing the format would take a job away from the 2 work-study students. And so if we change the format, I would need to come up with a way to replace that income for those students. Why not a buffet? I offered, where the attendees could, imagine this, serve themselves. I mean, you would still need people to prepare the food, put it on the platters, keep it hot, clean everything up. He would have to give it some thought, he said. Well, we have a year, I said, and I assured him that regardless of the format, I was aware that attendance on my part was mandatory, and I was not going to buck that rule. But if the next year the format had not changed, I would attend. But I would take my place as I saw it dictated in that environment. I would put on an apron, and I would serve. I spoke not another word to him about it for the remainder of the school year. Now, not far from Strong Wind's tent, there was a village, and in the village was a chief with 3 daughters. Of the 3, the youngest was very beautiful, and she had a gentle heart. Her sisters, though, were jealous of her. Over time, they just began to steal bits and pieces of her clothing until she had nothing left but rags to wear. They took away her earrings and her necklaces and her bracelets until she had no fine jewelry. Once, they cut off her long black hair and singed it so it was hard and just stood straight up on her head. When she spoke in protest, they spoke louder, drowning her out until soon she ceased speaking. Each time the sisters took something away, they grew more emboldened to take more. Once, they even took hot coals and burned her face and told her father that she had done it herself. She was forbidden to go near the fire, but she disobeyed and she fell in. But through all of this, youngest daughter kept her gentle heart. The following fall, 1 year later, the day of the annual mandatory faculty trustee dinner, I stopped by the headmaster's office, just wondering what the format is for tonight. Has anything changed? It looked like I caught him by surprise. No, it hasn't, came his reply, but he added, you can choose whether to come or not. I couldn't respond affirmatively to the "see you tonight" greetings that came from colleagues, and the groundswell of chatter quickly intensified. Folks popped by my classroom. I hear you're not coming tonight. How did you get out of this? I never really thought of that was the most oft-repeated reply. The sole faculty member of color in the middle school rang my phone that afternoon. Is it true what I'm hearing? You got to opt out of the dinner? When I explained myself, she said, well, I've already committed to going, but when people ask, and I know they will, why you're not there, I will gladly tell them. The day after the dinner, the buzz continued. Members of the lower school faculty were restless, and they were upset. 2 of them came to me at the end of the school day and said, we want you to know that we are upset. We're upset that a member of our community has been offended, and we'd like to come together and figure out a way to address that. An ad hoc committee was formed. My colleagues wanted to take an earnest look at our community. What else were we not aware of? What else can't we see? One of the issues, again loud and obvious to me, was the way in which children addressed the African American adults in the community. Teachers had a title of respect, Teacher Charlotte, Teacher whoever. The receptionist and the upper school secretary insisted on being addressed as Mrs. Brown or Mrs. Smith. But those in uniform, those who drove the school buses, those who served the food in the cafeteria, the ones who ensured that every nook and cranny of the school's exterior and interior spaces were spotless, sanitary, and presentable, were addressed by children as Larry or Loretta. Little white children addressing black adults as though they were kindergarten or 4th grade peers. From the time of slavery in this country, referring to African Americans as children have been a symbol of disrespect. It was dehumanizing, it was dismissive. In our community, you use someone's first name if they gave you permission to do so, and it was always preceded by Miss or Mr. So it was Miss Lucille or it was Mr. Jeff. The committee arranged to meet with members of the Board of Trustees to shed some light on some of these concerns and to emphasize its potential negative message and impact on not only the adults in the community, but on the children as well, and to seek their support and commitment to acknowledging and then addressing these concerns. Now, there came a day when the 2 older sisters decided that they wanted strong wind for their husbands. They couldn't decide which one of them should go first, so they decided to go together, arguing the entire way. Roughly They called Strong Wind's sister out of the tent, and she looked first at one girl and then the other and said, "What is it that you want?" They said, "We want Strong Wind as our husband." "I see," she said. "Come, walk with me, you on this side and you on the other." And together, they walked along the edge of the river until just at sunset. Strong Wind's sister said, "Ah, here he comes. Can you see my brother?" Well, the women could feel his presence. They knew that he was there because in the darkening sky, it became bright for just a moment and a strong wind caught their hair. But they could not see him. They looked at each other out of the corners of their eyes, and neither one of them wanted to be the second one to speak, so they both spoke. Yes, we do see him." And one of them said, "I saw him first." "Well," said Strong Wind's sister, "tell me, what does he use to pull his sled along the ground?" And again they looked and saw nothing, but they looked at each other out of the corners of their eyes, and together they said, "A strong piece of rawhide. Yes, it is rawhide." Strong Wind's sister laughed in their faces and sent the girls away without Strong Wind as their husband. "Well, you know," said a trustee, "it's one of these things you don't really think about till somebody brings it up, and then you don't think about it again till somebody brings it up again. Well," I said, "I do have a contract for this school year and expect to be here next year, so..." It was the old not an issue till somebody brings it up aspect of invisibility. How bad could it be if we don't see it? We're not noticing it. The underlying belief was that we are all equally positioned in the culture, and therefore my American experience couldn't possibly be different from his, and I could not possibly be a credible witness for my own experience. Well, not everyone chose to see or acknowledge the inconsistencies between philosophy and behavioral reality. The evidence of its power and destructive nature was brought home quite clearly when my second grade son asked me a question about the teacher in my classroom. He was referring to my older white assistant. I said, "Oh, no, she's my assistant teacher. I'm the teacher in this classroom." And then out of my second grade son's mouth came the words, "You couldn't be." We had both come to this school from the University of Pennsylvania Children's Center, where I had an office with my nameplate on the door. But somehow, in this environment, the message to him was that I, a black person, could not be in a position of authority. I needed no other supporting materials for my argument. What a wrenching contrast. Well, nobody notices. You couldn't be. A short time later, their youngest sister, the one with the scarred face and the gentle heart, decided that she would seek Strong Wind for her husband. And because she had no fine clothes, she went as she was, in rags. And her sisters stood at the edge of the village just laughing. "You silly girl, you ugly scar-faced thing. You really think that Strong Wind is going to marry you?" And so when she reached his tent, she stood outside, her eyes to the ground, and she never said a word. When Strong Wind's sister came out of the tent, she was surprised to see a girl standing there, and what a sight she was. "What is it that you want?" his sister asked. Without looking up, the scar-faced girl said, "I want Strong Wind for my husband." For a long time, Strong Wind's sister just looked at her. Then she extended her hand and said, "Come, walk with me." And together they walked along the edge of the lake until just at sunset. She turned and she said, Here comes my brother. Can you see him?" And for the first time in a long time, youngest sister raised her eyes and then lowered them again. "No," she said, "I see nothing." And Strong Wind's sister smiled because she knew this girl was being truthful. She said, look again. Tell me, what does he use to pull his sled along the ground?" And once again, she raised her eyes and she gasped because this time he was visible to her. "He's a magic person," she said. "He uses a rainbow to pull his sled along the ground." "Yes," said Strong Wind's sister. "Yes, he does. Now, look one more time. Once again, tell me, what is his bowstring made out of?" And almost afraid to look up again, the youngest scar-faced child looked up once again, and she said, "His bowstring, it's made of the Milky Way." "It is indeed," said Strong Wind's sister. "It is indeed." Well, for a while, I continued to be the one to bring it up. But the ad hoc committee formed by my wonderful lower school colleagues evolved into a school-wide earnest commitment to take a close and deep look at our community, of raising the difficult questions, of having the uncomfortable conversations, of seeing with fresh, sincere, and diligent eyes. How do we create community where all of its members are acknowledged and affirmed, validated, where they can thrive, and in turn help children actualize their gifts? Eventually, the school organized and hosted an annual independent school job fair for people of color, did a close examination of our multicultural community and all that means, organized a series of racial awareness seminars, one designed and led by former teacher, I don't know where she just went, Neonu, and her son, Kai, actually, and worked to ensure that all members of the community had a voice that was heard and honored. That effort, I hope, still continues. The 9 years I spent in a Philadelphia Friends School teaching, coaching, serving on various committees, study groups, remain the most memorable and growthful years of my teaching career. I had come to understand the importance of seeing each of my children, of holding each one in the light and allowing that light to illuminate gifts that I may not have otherwise seen, to remain always mindful and aware that each child's well-being and the health of the community that surrounded them was in my hands. Strong Wind's sister took the girl by the hand and led her back to her tent. She took off the rags she wore and gave her a brand new dress. Then she took water and she bathed her face. And when she was done, the scars were gone. Then she gave her bracelets and necklaces and jewelry, the finest she had ever seen, so that when her brother Strong Wind came into the tent, he would see a beautiful girl. She took a comb and she combed her hair, and the singed hairs began to fall to the floor, and her hair became longer and more beautiful. And right at that moment, Strong Wind entered, and he saw a beautiful girl with a gentle heart, and he made her his wife. They went everywhere together. She helped him with his work. He taught her what she needed to know. She was an eager teacher, an eager student, and they healed many people wherever it was they went. Their lives were long, and their love for each other was pure and unceasing. About 1.5 years after I left teaching, I went back to the school to go see a girls' basketball game. And I came in the rear, came in the lower school entrance, and started to make my way down the hall to the gym when I saw in the distance the head of maintenance. And just before I went to wave to get his attention, I saw a child run over to him. And as the child opened her mouth, I felt my teeth clench. But then I heard her say, "Hi, Mr. Smiley."